you're certainly not making a complete model. And people should have known better anyways, even subjects to the limits of your perceptions, because there's all sorts of things in the world that you can't directly perceive. But what you're doing instead is, it's something like you're making a partial model of the world, but you're only making a partial model of the world that you're currently operating on with some goal in mind, and you're also comparing that to a model of the world as it's currently unfolding. Because the other thing that was implicit, this is really tricky, this is where you have to watch your implicit assumptions. The other thing that was implicit in the original cybernetic theory was that you have a model of the world that's complete, and then what you're watching is the actual world as it unfolds, and that's not a model, that's just your perception of the objects. But that also turns out to be wrong, because your perception of the world as it unfolds is also a model. And so what's happening is, you look at the world you see is a model, and a very partial model at that, and then you compare it to the model that you expect, or desire, more accurately, desire, although the initial models were expectation. Because if you're in the lab listening to tones, it's not like you desire anything, but mostly when you're acting in the world, you have desires, and so the experimental constraints skewed the data in some sense by making people assume that what people were doing when they walked through the world was expecting instead of desiring. Anyways, you have a model of the world that's generated as you look at it, you have another model of the world that's something like the world that you desire, then you compare both of them, and they can mismatch, and they can mismatch in a way that upsets your current pursuit. That's the critical issue. You don't see the anomaly unless it upsets your current pursuit. And you kind of know that too, because when you're, like, while I'm lecturing to you guys, you know, mostly you're sitting still, but people are moving their arms, and they're moving their glasses, and they're shifting their feet, and generally I don't see any of that, because what difference does it make? You know, as it's not relevant to the ongoing what? Ongoing contract, the ongoing series of interactions, it's something like that. So as long as you keep your movements bounded within a range that doesn't interfere with whatever it is that we're doing, then it's going to be as invisible to me as the gorilla was when you were counting the balls. And the cool thing is about the gorilla experiment, or one of them, is that the reason you were blind to the gorilla was because you were counting the balls. And so that's so fascinating, because what it shows to a huge degree, an unfathomable degree, an unfathomable degree, is that the value structure that you inhabit determines what you perceive. It doesn't just determine what you expect or want, it bloody well determines what you see. And that makes the world a completely different place. No one really expected that. And so if you watch the basketballs, you see the basketball. If you stop watching the basketball, well, then you see the gorilla. And so the first question that arises from an experiment like that is, well, just exactly what is it that you don't see in the world? And the answer is all of it. You see so little, it's unbelievable. You see that tiny amount that's necessary for you to undertake the next sequence in your plotted movements, something like that. But then that becomes very complicated too, because it isn't obvious how you can conceptualize or how you can determine what your next movement is, because it's not like you just add up movements and make up your life. It's not that simple. Here's part of the issue. So let's say that you have a computer. Yeah, I have a story for this. So one time when I was in Montreal, I was using my computer. I was in my apartment, and I was typing out an essay, and it crashed. And so what happens when your computer crashes? Well, you know, usually you utter some sort of curse. And it's interesting that you do that, because the circuit that you use to curse with is the same circuit that monkeys use to detect eagles or leopards or snakes. And so when there's a bunch of monkeys together, you know, they're not all preyed on by eagles and leopards and snakes, but you know, there's usually a predator in that category for every single monkey population. And so when the monkeys are watching, they have an emotional utterance that the most nervous monkey might utter first, that basically says, you know, hide from the eagle, get out on the branch so the cougar can't eat you, and look the hell out for the snake. But there's a circuit that's linked to emotions that produces an instinctive utterance that represents that category. And that's the same circuit that you use when you curse. And it's not the same circuit that you use for normal language. And we know that because that circuit is activated in people who have Tourette's syndrome, because they preferentially swear. You think, well, why in the world would you have a neurological condition that makes you preferentially curse? Well, that's the reason. You don't just have one linguistic circuit. You have one for, oh my God, there's a predator. And that's the one that will get activated when something happens like your computer crashing. Because, you know, you're an evolved creature, and so those old circuits that were there, say, 30 million years ago to deal with exceptions are the same circuits you're using now to deal with your computer. Why else would you want to hit it? Right? Because that's what you want to give it a whack. It's like, it doesn't behave, whack. Aggression right away. Well, that's some clue as to the category system that you're automatically using to encapsulate the event. Okay, so fine, what do you do when your computer crashes? Well, first you curse, and then you do the stupid things that idiot primates do when they're trying to deal with something that's way too complex, and maybe you turn it on and off, right? And that doesn't work, it didn't work. And so then I thought, well, maybe the power bar went, so I checked the power bar, and I turned it on and off and nothing happened. And so I brought a light behind the computer and the light wouldn't go on. And so I thought, aha, I must have blown a fuse. So I went to the fuse box and took a look, but the fuses were fine. And so I thought, oh, the power's gone out. So then I went outside and the power was out. None of the street lights were working, the power was out everywhere. And it was seriously out because this was the time that almost the entire northeast power grid in Quebec collapsed. And the reason it collapsed is because there was a solar flare. That happens reasonably often, and the solar flare produced a huge electromagnetic pulse because it's basically like a million hydrogen bombs going off at the same time, 93 million miles away, produces this tremendous electromagnetic pulse, passes through the Earth's atmosphere, produces a spike in current in the main power lines and blows the whole system. And so, just so you know, an event like that happens about every 150 years, and if we had one now, it would take out all of our electronics, like one of the big ones. There was a big one back in the late 1800s. Everything, satellites, computers, cars, everything, gone. And so that's a big problem, and no one knows what to do about it. One missed us by about 9 minutes, I think 2 years ago. So that's something else to worry about if you're inclined to worry about those sorts of things. Okay, so what did I conclude from that? Well, the function of my computer was dependent on the stability of the sun. It's not the first thing you check out when your computer crashes, right? You don't run out and go, hey, well, yeah, the sun's still there, no problem, I can cross that off the list. But to me, it's an extraordinarily interesting example of the invisible interdependence of things, and our tendency to fragment things. What we seem to do is to look at things at the simplest level of analysis that actually functions. So for example, when you're interacting with your computer, you're not interacting with your computer at all, really. You're interacting with the keyboard, sort of one key at a time, and you're interacting with the symbols on the screen. But as long as the computer is working, you don't care about it at all. You don't give it a second thought. And you certainly don't care about the fact that it's dependent on, well, the electrical power, for example, and the electrical power is dependent on, I don't know how many men are out there right now, or were out there last night when it was freezing rain, fixing power lines and freezing to death while they're doing it so that your stupid computer doesn't malfunction while you're watching cat videos. There's this incredibly dynamic living system that's social and economic and political that has to remain dead stable in order for us to have access to functional and pure non-fluctuating electricity 100% of the time. Because you also don't think, well, the stability of your computer is dependent on the stability of the political system, but of course it is, because if the political system mucks up and the economic system goes, then people don't go out and work to fix things, and things are breaking all the time. That's their normal state, is broken, not working. And that's all, in some sense, folded up, not only inside your computer, but actually inside your conceptions of of your tiny conceptions of the computer while you're using it, and you only get a glimpse of what the computer is really like when it doesn't work. Then it's when it becomes a complex object, right? As long as it's working, then your stupid perceptions are perfectly fine to get the job done. And that's another indication that what you're using your perceptions for is to get the job done. And how you specify exactly the level of resolution that you should be operating at, I haven't sorted that out, but it's something like you default